Is this the moment? Was a walk-off, the Braves' first of the season, the spark that leads to a successful run for the defending champs? That moment, injuries, one of the season-ending variety, and so much more here on Battery Power TV. Cory McCartney, along with Grant McAuley, and we'll be joined by Fox Sports' Ben Verlander, the host of the Flippin' Bats pod. But first, Grant, timely hitting. The Braves are dead last in OPS in high-leverage situations, but got a major boost both statistically and mojo-wise out of Orlando Arcia with a split with the Red Sox in his walk-off homer.
Yeah, you needed these dramatics. We've been kind of wondering when the Braves were going to show a little bit of what they've been the last 4 years, which is a club that you can knock them down, but they're going to find ways to come back. And that just hadn't happened here in 2022. I was surprised it took over a month to get their first walk-off win. Wins after the other team scores first have been hard to come by this year. So having a walk-off victory against the Red Sox, earning that split, not risking dropping a couple games to another team, another series to another team well below 500, those were a couple of things to avoid. And thankfully, the 8th and 9th hitters in the order came up big for the Braves in Game 2 against Boston. Travis Demeritte got him on the board with a 2-run homer. Orlando Arcia capped all the scoring, capped the night, and gave the Braves that first exciting walk-off. And when you think about what the Braves have ahead of them, which is some very good clubs, the Padres rolling into town, a trip to see Milwaukee, again, a club the Braves just took a series from. This May schedule is going to be more of a test than the April schedule was for the Braves. So any kind of momentum and mojo you can get going and kind of get into feeling like you're the club that you came into the year feeling like you were/are, that was a pretty big win. I don't want to overstate it, but I also don't want to dismiss it entirely because these are the kind of moments that have been kind of few and far between for the Braves this year.
Yeah, without question, and still searching for their first 3-game winning streak of the year. They'll look to keep the good times rolling as they host the Padres for 3 games beginning Friday. We'll set the stage for that matchup as we're joined next by Fox Sports' Ben Verlander. And here is Ben Verlander, Fox Sports analyst and host of the Flippin' Bats pod. Ben, good to have you in.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Now, the Braves were without Ronald Acuna Jr. for the first 19 games of the season. And while he sat out Wednesday with a mild groin strain, the impact of one of the game's best players in this lineup, absolutely undeniable. What have been your impressions of this Braves team both before and after his return?
Well, especially after. I mean, it's night and day. They're still not firing on all cylinders yet, but you can see how much of an impact he makes for them. I mean, he comes back, he hits a home run falling down, and then he hits one and does the celebration. And the impact he has on the Atlanta Braves is massive, and the impact he has for the game of baseball cannot be understated. I mean, it's pretty remarkable what he does for the game. You have LeBron tweeting about him. He just brings an energy and a passion to the game of baseball that's much needed, and to the Atlanta Braves. So I think they're gonna turn it around. The beginning of the season was slow, as it was last year, and last year ended up just fine for the Braves, if you remember, which I'm sure you guys do. But it was a struggle for them through the All-Star break, and they didn't really get going until the trade deadline. Now, I don't think they have that luxury this year because the Mets are much better. And the last year, the whole division was kind of like that. They were all just kind of muddled together. So you don't have that luxury this year, but I do think they're going to be better and they're going to get there quickly. There's just too much talent. They're so good.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to my question about this is that if you do look at what the Braves did in 2021, I mean, it was unprecedented as they were a team that couldn't even find their way to 500 basically for the first 3 or 4 months of the season. Then they go on this great run. They get into the postseason. They win the whole thing. And the Braves fans waited an awful long time for that. Now, when you come back here in 2022, I don't think they wanted to sit around and see another slow start and the slow climb to 500 or above and a crazy deadline. But as you size up the National League this year, you touched on the Mets. We know what the Dodgers are and what they are every single year. And there are some other, I think, National League clubs that are contenders, of course. Where do you see the Braves, when and if they get to clicking on all cylinders, sizing up in the pecking order of the National League as a whole?
I mean, when the Braves are playing to their capability, I truly believe that they are a top team in the National League. Obviously, my prediction heading into the year was that they would get back to the World Series, and I believe that. And they obviously do need to turn it around, but there's a few reasons I say that. One, I think their team this year is better. Obviously, it's never a good thing when you lose Freddie Freeman, ever. And I'm not saying Matt Olson is he's going to slide in perfectly and be Freddie Freeman. He's not, and he shouldn't be expected to be. But he's a really good baseball player and not much right now of a step back from Freddie Freeman. But then you look around the rest of the team, you brought back a couple of those guys that were good trade deadline guys. Then you get Ronald Acuna back. Then hopefully at some point you can get Mike Soroka back, who I actually had on my podcast a few weeks ago, and we talked about his return. So you start looking around, and this team is okay. They're really good, and they're going to add one of the best players in the world back and one of the bright young stars on the mound back, hopefully at some point as well. So that's huge. And then you start looking at playoff experience. And I don't think it's talked enough about once you're finally able to get over that hump. The Houston Astros for 5 years now have been to consecutive ALCSs, 5 years in a row. And a big part of that is just because they know they can win. They've been there, they've done it, they have that experience. And the Atlanta Braves got that. They got that done. They got over the hump of beating the Dodgers in the playoffs. They obviously blew the 3-1 lead. Then they get back the next year. They get it done. Then they get to the World Series. They get to experience that. Then they win the World Series. Now you have all the confidence in the world of winning in the playoffs. So I think that combination just makes them an absolute dangerous threat once they get there. Is yes, I think this team could potentially be better. They also have that really, really valuable experience.
Okay, so you mentioned Mike Soroka, and talking to him a couple of days ago. I mean, he says that, the Achilles is feels great. No issues whatsoever, no trepidations. So the Braves right now have two of the top 15 starters in Fangraph WAR with Max Fried and Kyle Wright. Charlie Morton's coming off of his finest outing of the year. Ian Anderson continues to minimize damage. What are your thoughts on the current makeup of this staff?
I love the pitching staff. I'm such a big fan of Max Fried and everything he does on the mound and how good his stuff is. And that's just the beginning of this rotation. I mean, you named them. They're so good and so talented. And people that don't know the name or don't respect the name Kyle Wright need to watch him pitch. It's been special. I think people look at that Braves team and think, okay, the rotation has Fried and an older Charlie Morton. Morton's getting better. He had a great start, but he's not even the staple in that rotation. They're all good. And I think having Morton in that rotation has just made everybody around him so good. He was the perfect piece to add to that rotation just as an older veteran with still good stuff, but that's able to kind of propel and bring the young guys along with them. I'm a big fan of the Braves rotation. And like the Braves, when you have an offense that's struggling, like a lot of those guys are right now, like a lot of the league is right now, having a pitching staff that you can count on and rely on to go out there and kind of minimize the damage night in and night out is extremely valuable. So I love that rotation, and it's only going to be more dangerous when hopefully, fingers crossed, Soroka comes back at some point.
Yeah, and I think you're talking to two people right here that definitely have had their fingers crossed for a couple of years that Mike Soroka is going to get back and do the things that he does, because meeting him at a very young age, I'm talking like 18, 19 years old, talking to him was like talking to somebody that had been in the big leagues for 10 years. It was like he already knew the mental side of everything. And then physically, he's an extremely gifted pitcher, and hopefully he's back on the mound very soon, because I think he's going to be a big-time impact player for the Braves once he does get healthy, and we're all looking forward to that. But when you talk about impact players, we talked about Ronald Acuna Jr. a little bit earlier and the impact that he has and his, place in the upper echelon of the players in the game. But the Padres have one of their own guys in Fernando Tatis Jr., who they've been without this year, yet they are still plugging along in contention, having a good enough season to have themselves in position so that when he does come back, I think he can make a major impact for them. And that probably goes without saying. But how have you seen the Padres kind of weather the storm, if you will, without their best player for a period of time, much like the Braves had to do without Ronald?
I think there's a couple answers here. And the first and most obvious one is that Manny Machado is playing like 3 all-star players combined. I mean, he's putting the team on his back and saying, all right, I'm going to do this until Tatis comes back. And you also have guys like Hosmer, who has been on a tear, who seems to every April just do incredible, and then the rest of the year just kind of vanishes. So hopefully he doesn't do that. You never want to see that happen for a guy that's getting paid what he is, and it's been a struggle out there for him. So, what Machado and Hosmer are doing out there, they're carrying the team. And I said before the year, I think the Padres can be a playoff team. They just have to tread water until Tatis can come back and not let too big of a gap go between the Dodgers and a wild card spot. They just have to kind of tread water. The second and arguably most important thing for me that isn't probably being talked about enough is the Bob Melvin effect on this team. I think he is one of the best managers in baseball. What he was able to do in Oakland with a roster that wasn't near as talented as this Padres team he's taken over is remarkable. So then you get a guy like him coming in, taking over a team that's very young, a lot of talent, but you kind of need to hone in that talent and figure out how to control it and how to use it. We saw Tatis and Machado last year in the dugout getting after it a little bit. Now, I'm on the side of like, who really cares? Like sure. that happens all the time behind closed doors. But that does say like there's, they're not exactly clicking on all cylinders by any means. I think he's a guy that can come in, take all the talent in the world and figure out how to get the most out of it, because we all know it's Moneyball going around in Oakland, and he was able to take that roster and get the absolute best out of everyone. If you're able to get the absolute best out of everyone on the roster with the Padres, well, that's going to be a really dangerous team. So I think having him there and him in control has been crucial for their success.
Okay, so you mentioned Hosmer and Machado. When you add in Jerks and Profar, the Padres have 3 of the top 14 players in year-over-year increases in terms of their slugging percentage. So obviously a deep impact they're having with that lineup right now. Reports are coming in that they're nearing a deal with Robinson Cano. What are your thoughts on how he potentially would fit into the mix there?
Yeah, I think right now in baseball, offense is tough to come by, and they're kind of taking a flyer on him. I don't know what the contract and all that stuff is going to look like. But if we're putting that aside, in spring training, he was on a tear. He looked really good. He looked great at the plate. Then the regular season starts and they go up to New York and it's just not good. And part of me thinks, yes, obviously we can't expect him to be the Robbie Cano that we saw at second base for the New York Yankees for years. That's not him. But take a flyer on a guy that has shown even this year that he's capable of being a good bat. Maybe his time has just come to a close in New York. Maybe there had just been too much going on there, and everything he went through with the Yankees and now the Mets and getting suspended and all that. Maybe he just needed a change of scenery. So I'm all in on them taking a chance on him. I mean, their DH spot out there hasn't been great. Luke Voigt's been injured. He wasn't great when he was playing. Obviously, a couple home runs yesterday. But I think I'm on board with it. Why not take a flyer? If it works, great. If not, cut him loose.
Yeah, when the Mets are picking up what they're picking up and you got the DH in the pocket now, it completely changes everything. So the pitching matchups lining up for the Braves-Padres series are Fried and Yu Darvish on Friday, Morton and Sean Manaea on Saturday, which will be on FS1, and Kyle Wright and Joe Musgrave on Sunday. What are some of the storylines that you're watching for in this series?
One is those pitching matchups you just listed. I mean, that's really impressive. I know everybody likes to talk about the Mets rotation and the Brewers rotation. We don't talk enough about the rotations of the Padres and the Braves. And now the guys are lining up against each other. It's going to be a really fun matchup. It's going to be a really good, a lot of good pitching involved. And I'm very interested in this Braves offense and when they're going to start clicking. I mean, it's going to be tough to do it against this pitching staff, but it's time. It's time to get going. It's time. Like, you can't have guys like Austin Riley and Ozzie and Dansby and Ozuna and them be held down but for so long. I mean, it's bound to turn around, and this is a great time to do it. And in my opinion, this is coming into the year, this was a battle of 2 potential playoff teams, and I still think this has the potential battle of 2 playoff teams, but it's certainly not without star power. And and when I look at this series, I think, okay, this is a really talented Padres team that's playing good baseball going into Atlanta. This is a really talented Braves team that's not playing their best baseball. Now it's go time. It's go time for the Braves.
Well, he is Ben Verlander. Give him a listen on the Flippin' Bats pod. Ben, thank you so much for the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys.
We started things off talking about Orlando Arcia's heroics, a position he was in due to some lineup machinations with Ronald Acuna Jr. out with a mild groin strain. He's not expected to need an IL stint, but the Braves did get a season-ending blow with Manny Pena needing wrist surgery. Test revealed ligament and cartilage damage in his left wrist. On a 2-year deal, Pena is expected back by the spring, and the immediate thought, Grant, is that this is going to mean an opportunity for William Contreras to get playing time that didn't seem as likely when Pena was signed back in November.
No, it didn't. It seemed like the Braves had decided they wanted to go veterans and depth. And then if William Contreras, or at the time, Shea Langoliers was going to be some kind of factor, then they would cross that bridge when they got there. Obviously, Langoliers is an Oakland Athletic farmhand now. And for William Contreras, I mean, he's made the most of some limited opportunities here this year. He got a long run, a tryout, if you will, in 2021 when the Braves were desperately searching for answers without Travis d'Arnaud. I think that experience is good for him. I think that what we've seen thus far early this year is good for him. I think he's going to hit some, but how does he work with the staff? That it felt like the next step for Williams. So it's another opportunity. I think he is going to get to catch a good amount. And if they want to manage Travis d'Arnaud's workload, then there's the opportunity to do so if you feel like you got somebody that can hold up his end of the bargain, both behind the plate and at the plate. So it's kind of go time for William Contreras here, and an opportunity he didn't expect, but that's kind of the twofold deal with injury is somebody goes down, somebody's got to step up. William Contreras is first in that line.
Yeah, he's had some success so far. As you mentioned, 3 home runs and 19 plate appearances, the most of any player in the majors with 20 or fewer trips to the plate. And he's done well with consistent ABs, 133 WRC plus last year in 44 games in Gwinnett. Would like to see some creativity, though, maybe getting him to share some time with d'Arnaud. Beyond that, you look at the outfield spot that was a talking point during the spring. Maybe they could get him some time at DH as well. But certainly, let's get creative and see what that bat's able to do. But I think you're right. What can he do with that pitching staff? Because I think that was the thing that really hurt him last year when he got that long look. If you're not already, be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications for an alert every time that we drop a new episode here on Battery Power TV. For Grant McAuley, I'm Cory McCartney. Big thanks to Ben Verlander for joining us, and we'll see you in next time, Braves Country.